Welcome to Dhamma USA's Thursday guest lecture series. We are honored to present lecture number 54 with the topic of psychological aspects of dependent origination. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Beth Jacobs. Dr. Jacobs earned a doctoral degree. Her practice focuses in individual psychotherapy with specialty in journal writing therapy. To learn more info about Dr. Jacobs, including her publications, presentations, awards, and associations, please visit dhammausa.org. Without further delay, I invite Dr. Jacobs to begin our lecture this evening.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Bante, for having me here tonight. Thank you, all of you who are here, and good evening or day to you, wherever you are. And thank you also to people who may watch this in the future on YouTube. Tonight, we're going to look at a topic that is, I'm sure, very familiar to many of you, the 12 links of dependent origination on the wheel of life and death. For me, this topic is infused, especially with the generosity of my root teacher, Roshi Sojun Diane Martin. She studied this topic for 50 years, and it's a core of her heart-mind transmission of practice. So I wish to express gratitude to her. She calls the wheel of life and death the theater of the self. And hopefully tonight we can look into some of what she means by that. But because this topic is such a fundamental teaching, we can never go over it too much. And because it's so complex, every angle of view adds something to our understanding and our capacity to use these teachings towards our own and others' liberation. So I'll put up an image, hopefully.
Are you ready, you Dr. Jacobs? Okay, I was going to say.
There we go. I think I got it. It might be small, but yeah, they were just working with me with the screen sharing, which is not my strong point. But this might be small, but it's a beautiful image of the wheel of life and death, just to orient us. I'm sure you've all seen images like this. This is a Tibetan image where you see the links of dependent origination around the outside with Mara holding the wheel and the Buddha's outside and inside the wheel helping us. So our idea tonight is to look at the dynamic links on the wheel together with a focused eye on experience, on the manifestations that we recognize in our unique and particular human lives. As I've said before in this series, I came to Buddhism from psychology, and nothing makes a person question causality and dependent origination more than spending 40 years being a therapist and listening to people describe their lives and their inner workings. But when you see how lives unfold and how patterns manifest and how patterns reinforce themselves, and then you see how change is also possible, it's a great inspiration for Buddhist study, which is essentially about the same thing. But the Buddhist study has an unbounded context and an eye towards a vaster soteriology than psychotherapy. So tonight we're going to spin the wheel a few times. I want to talk in terms of the Abhidharma and the psychology of that, the technical psychology. And then I want to look at it backwards and look at it also in terms of some examples so that we can really kind of unpack experience within this flowing wheel. Eihei Dogen, the great Zen master of the 13th century, speaks of a beautiful image in one of his fascicles in the work, the Shobo Genzo, the Treasury of the Dharma Eye. This fascicle is called Muchu Setsumu, Within a Dream, Expressing a Dream. And the image that he describes is of achieving balance with a steelyard scale that is hanging in emptiness. So a steelyard scale is an old-fashioned kind of scale where you hold it from the top, and on one side's a basket, and then there's a steel rod with a weight. You adjust the weight to calibrate to the basket, but you're holding the scale. as if it's kind of floating in emptiness. And I love this image because our lives require a great precision of particular understanding, even while we know we are hanging in emptiness and we're connected with all beings in all times, on all scales beyond our human comprehension. And still, we balance and adjust within our own steelyard scale. Our human comprehension, while it may not cover the realms within which we exist, is our tool. And we need to take care of many truths, as many truths as we can. There's a lovely quote from Shodo Harada in his beautiful book, Not One Single Thing, where he says, if you want to realize true nature, you cannot set aside what it is to be a human being. And Dr. Bante's talks emphasize this in his wonderful teachings. His New Year's talk was about how to make the Dhamma practical and real to us. We're 21st century people. We have a great deal of international exposure, a lot of psychological information, a lot of psychological needs. And by investigating our experience in this deep way, we find the harmonics and the mechanisms where our intention has space to flourish. The more we understand the way the wheel turns, the more we move within it with purpose and some compassion and dignity. So we know that the Buddha highlighted the importance of understanding these links continuously with a wonderful quote, whoever sees dependent co-arising, they see Dhamma. Whoever sees Dhamma, they see dependent co-arising. It's so basic. Now, the wheel of life and death, as we're looking at it, it illustrates the scaleless occurrence of interdependent or dependent origination, link by link, connecting minute cognitive occurrences, connecting lifetimes, connecting the rise and fall of world systems. This wheel turns on every scale at the same time. Now, the method of dependent arising is marked by the simple happening of a state in dependence on some other state. But simple happening doesn't mean that it's simple. It just means that its mere occurrence is all that is needed to condition the next state. And though this can sound kind of linear, A leads to B leads to C, but there's multiplicity in every moment, and there are interconnections across the wheel and across all the realms. And there are myriad effects, infinite effects possible. Every link impacts every other link. It's not just a sequence. It's like the eightfold path. It's not steps, it's folding. So nothing has one cause, as the commentaries state and as our lives make very obvious. And there are many ways that dependent origination, many sutras that describe it. When this exists, this comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. This is the essential linkage between all of the links before we get to the specific links. But then we have to remember also when this ceases to exist, this ceases to be also. And that gives us a certain kind of power when we think about how to alter our experience of helplessness on the wheel. And the Visuddhimagga said like this, because particular states are produced by particular conditions, neither less nor more, it is called reality, suchness. So that's kind of alerting us to that emptiness context, that this is all about motion and this is all about interactivity, and we're moving within it. Finally, I'd like to read a quote from Bhikkhu Bodhi's commentary to the Upanisa Sutta, and he's describing the study of these 12 links of dependent origination and how vital it is. As the frame behind the Four Noble Truths, the key to the perspective of the middle way, and the conduit to the realization of selflessness, it is the unifying theme. So he's really saying how central that is. I'm going to move to another slide. This is a more diagrammatic slide. This is the Wheel of Life here from Narada Tera's Manual of Abhidhamma. And so this gives us our links. It may be hard to see, but I'll spell them out. The links of dependent origination are immutable laws of unchangeable dharmas, but in infinite combinations and momentary dynamics that are always interpenetrating with current intention. Our momentary karma carried on this current, it could be a microscopic bit of intention with every cognitive process that's always interacting with this wheel. And that is where it is not the same as saying, that everything is predetermined. So our study here is not just theoretical and elegant, but to understand more fully how we can develop and interject right intention into this experience. The wheel is kind of like the engine of samsara. And we have to be like car mechanics. We have to understand how this thing is working so we can use the tools we have to make it work the best. So as car mechanics, or as, there is a wonderful book by Mara Pana called The Mechanics of Buddhism, and there's something to that. But we're going to be looking at the mechanics of the 12 links. I want to talk first kind of technically, but I will try to keep it in terms of human experience. But I want to start with the kind of mechanics of the wheel, and then we're going to go into more kind of commonplace human experiences. So you may not be able to see this, but if you wish to follow along, I'm going to use this kind of explanation to just go through the mechanics for our first spin of the wheel here. And we start with ignorance, not because ignorance is without causes, but it's a good starting point. There's a wonderful quote in the Visuddhimagga where they say, a figurative way in which it can be treated as the root cause, simply as the starting point in an exposition of the round of becoming. So we're starting with ignorance, and ignorance leads to, I'm just going to say leads to, and what I mean is that it is conditioning the next thing. But ignorance leads to karmic formations. Now, in Abhidharma terms, I'm going to use some terms, and for some of you, these are very familiar terms, and for some of you, they probably aren't, so I'll do a little translation. But ignorance is the Chaitasika delusion, and a Chaitasika is a mental factor, and every single tiny instance of consciousness action, which is called a chitta, is accompanied by from 7 to 52 of these mental factors. But one of them is ignorance. And depending on that, karmic formations arise. And in the Abhidharma, the karmic formations are carried on, or kind of conveyed with 29 karma producing chittas, 29 types of consciousness actions that actually carry our karma. In this technical explanation, ignorance here specifically means that we don't know the Four Noble Truths, that we don't understand that there is a prenatal past and a post-mortem future, and we don't see dependent arising. So when you put all that together, ignorance is kind of an overly subjective state, which leads to karma. So then so we can see, maybe in more commonplace terms, that ignorance allows volition to influence, and then delusion allows us to start interfering with reality and making these formations. So then dependent on these formations arises consciousness events, the kind of chittas that are the result of karma. The karma is in motion, and now we are having consciousness experiences that are patterned by the karma. Resultant consciousness states begin to accrue from intention. Then, depending on consciousness events, arises nama rupa. Now, I don't translate that because it's too many syllables, basically. A lot of times people say name and form, but that's kind of concrete. It's really mentality, materiality. It's the quality of mentality and materiality, and it is not separated. Nama Rupa is a kind of constellation. So this, I'm going to pause here because this is called, in the Mahanidana Sutra, this is called the hidden vortex of the wheel. So you've got this wheel spinning around, but you've got this little kind of curlicue in the wheel where consciousness and nama rupa are reciprocally and mutually influencing each other. So I'm talking about the links, one conditioning the next, conditioning the next. But at this little juncture, it kind of swirls around. They condition each other. And this is to say that the consciousness events include rebirth linking, which is a consciousness event that carries between existences of beings, which carries qualities of consciousness between existences. So the rebirth linking moment determines the realm of existence of the next being. So in that sense, consciousness truly creates the body or the parameters of experience that are coming about. And I'd like to read a quote from, if you can see it at all, it's in the middle there. This is from the Mahanidana Sutra, explaining this very difficult to explain hidden vortex. It says, thus, Ananda, with mentality and materiality as condition, there is consciousness. With consciousness as condition, there is mentality and materiality. So you see the spin there. It is to this extent, Ananda, that one can be born, age, and die, pass away, and re-arise. To this extent that there is a pathway for designation. To this extent that there is a pathway for language. To this extent that there is a pathway for description. To this extent that there is a sphere for wisdom. To this extent that the round turns for describing this state of being, that is, when there is mentality, materiality, together with consciousness. I find that a very amazing quote talking about our human condition and how there are all these pathways for language and description and ways we experience. But then the language switches. It doesn't say pathway for wisdom. It says a sphere of wisdom. It's a little different. But this is the way the round turns for our actual existence. It illustrates the breadth of consciousness's creative power in our human life and of our human life. And it is this that allows us to be human, that has allowed us to be born in this human realm. It is also this that relegates us to being human, to being the confused and seeking people that we often are. So this is a loaded juncture that I want to pause there. Just kind of unpack that a little. But we will move onward now, because dependent on nama rupa arises the 6 sense bases. Now, these are the 5 external senses and mind as a sense, and the sense bases are the material processes that allow us to experience our senses. So it's not like a sense base isn't for visual sense, isn't your eyeball, but it is maybe the photoreceptors on a rod cell, in your retina. Just the slightest way that our bodies are designed to interact with the objects in the external and internal world. So this is classically defined as pre-birth, when the sense organs develop based on mentality and materiality, because now we have conditions for karma. Now we can interact with the world. So dependent on these 6 sense bases arises contact. And contact on the wheel is defined as a sense base and a sense object arising in a particular sense field. So those 3 things come together. That is contact. And that arises dependent on these bases. Now, internal and external have meaning, and there's kind of a raw interaction happening. But dependent on contact arises feeling, the simultaneous particular affective tone in the cetasika, or mental factor of feeling. So the feeling that arises depends on contact itself, not on the object. So the feeling arises based on the 3 things coming together. But we have this very very natural, bivalent kind of push-pull. And it's based on our personal constructions. It's based on our karma. It's based on our history. It's based on the prior moment on all scales. But we have a raw kind of engaged discrimination that happens when our senses meet an object. Then, dependent on feeling, arises craving. Now, here we're talking about the mental factor of greed. And it can be for any of the 6 types of sense objects, or it can be for pleasure, or for existence, or for annihilation. So once we feel something, we start to crave the positive feelings, crave relief from the negative feelings. We can crave for annihilation as a wish to destroy or avoid what felt bad. This is very much like Freud's pleasure principle. Once we feel, we are caught in this push-pull. Then, dependent on craving, arises clinging. This is kind of an end stage of craving. I think we're on the next page. Let me just do that. Yeah. The end stage of craving, it's related to the death chitta in a lifetime scale look at the wheel. So it's the craving solidifies into clinging. There's 4 kinds of clinging seen here, to sense pleasures, to wrong view, to rites and ceremonies, and to the doctrine of self. And so those are all under wrong view. And so here we have taken that craving and we've started to lock it up with some ideas and maybe some rationalizations. But dependent on clinging, then arises existence. Now, in the kind of classical look here, the particular form of rebirth is now determined by one of those resultant chittas. And a particular existence has taken form. On the scale of day-to-day life or day-to-day experience, I'll say, what happens is that in the intensity of clinging, something is actually formed and arises as an existing phenomena because of our reification of our experience. But karma is manifest here, that this link and becomes a definite type of material or experiential phenomena. Then, dependent on existence, arises birth. And this is where the 5 aggregates come into being, the resultant chittas, and all the karma-born material processes. Now something is really real, existence is karmically active, and life has taken form in a new realm. And the tendencies have taken form in a new realm. Dependent on birth arises nothing but decay and death, because all that is born dies, and all that arises ceases on every scale. So death is rooted in birth as its principal condition. And then dependent on decay and death arises ignorance again, because there's the arising of the asavas, the influx. We are attached to samsara, we take another spin. What takes form dissolves, and we don't like that. That's another way of saying dukkha. So this leads to ignorance again, which is, again, not without its causes. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can take the slide down, but I'm not able to do that. We could go without the slide for a minute if that's possible from where you guys are. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I would like to take another spin here, and I'm just going to run through these. I kind of talked about the Abhidharma underpinnings, but I want to just run through it very psychologically now, because this operates in so many ways. And I think understanding kind of the technicalities helps us plug in this. So this is the personal wheel, just a kind of one way to describe it. you could all find your own ways. When you're studying the wheel in some technical way, it's great to pull away and just say, what does this mean right now in my experience? This is one way to do it. We're ignorant all the time because there's so much we don't know, and because there's so much we don't like or want to know. We're not like the Buddha, Lokavidu, knower of all worlds, but psychologically, we also all tend to naturally avoid what doesn't suit our sense of ourselves or our purpose in any given moment. Our perceptions are incredibly selective when you think of how much is there to pick from. So we split off content we don't like. We're ignorant. And this leads to formations because we kind of broke reality with our ignorance, and we make up things to kind of fit together the broken pieces that we chose. We kind of make our experience into an art project. And this leads to consciousness. The new mind processes we need to fit into this reality, the consciousness that has the purpose of preserving our needed vision. This leads to mentality materiality. This is an essential manifestation of division. We kind of split here. A subject-object or a mind-body split, or simply a split between our made-up state and reality. We've kind of cut something here. Remember what Bhikkhu Bodhi translated the Mahanidana Sutra. To this extent, we have a pathway for expression and for that sphere of wisdom. Susan Murphy, in the book Mining the Earth and Mending Our World, puts it like this: our particular situation of possessing a consciousness that has no beginning or end when we look into it, and which blooms in a body that is limited in time and capacity. I like that. So what we're saying then is that we have mentality, materiality, nama rupa leading to, we had mentality, nama rupa now leading to the 6 sense bases. So our senses start meeting stimuli and proliferating detail and modes of perception that can anchor our sense of ourself as we just designed it into the world. We start seeing things and packaging it and cutting out things and focusing and deriving our attention in ways that perpetuate the wheel. This leads to contact, the raw interactions in this world between our own and not our own reality, between ourselves and other people. This is contact, and this always leads to feeling. A valence accompanies each interaction, tiny and small. There's this natural push-pull that's based on our constructions. Our feelings are based on discriminating evaluations of everything we are and know, and not on the object itself. But this leads to craving. It's kind of an itching, a constant sense of wishing to perpetuate what we want and perpetuate the feelings themselves. We're constantly doing little adjustments. Sometimes you can notice this in meditation in the body. Just, wait a minute, I'm not symmetrical. Wait a minute, I'm not this, that. These constant adjustments in our craving. So it's kind of a logarithmic progression that we keep proliferating on our perceptions and our reactions. And this leads to clinging, where it gets desperate, stronger, and more active. We grasp onto what we want and what we believe and what we want to believe, and this leads to existence. We reify our truths and we continue reinforcing our patterns, and this leads to birth, because now what we've made is totally solid and real to us. Nothing else comes into our attention field because we've defined it in this way, and this leads to death and decay because it never works. Something shatters our construction, if nothing else, the bodily truth of death. We don't like that at all, and so we try to cope with it, and this leads to ignorance because the ways we cope can be so limiting. Now that's a kind of a negative samsaric view of the wheel without the kind of repairs and right views and intentions that we can have. So we're going to look at it here, and I want to give a specific enactment to help illustrate it. I really like this example, and this is used by Thanissaro Bhikkhu in his really excellent book, The Shape of Suffering, which covers basically the same territory we are in here. He talks about something very typical, and it's a good example. You're going to a family dinner, And there's a really unpleasant family member. He uses the example of an abusive alcoholic uncle. So let's stick with that. And that person's going to be there, and you're walking to the dinner. So with a little bit of embellishment, this is how he lays out the 12 steps, the 12 links in a negative manifestation like I just kind of described. Okay, you're walking to dinner, ignorance. Number one, you're unaware of your state and its causation. So number two, maybe you start worrying about it. Now, Thanissaro Bhikkhu here very usefully divides experience into different, he uses the word fabrication instead of formations, and he talks about different kinds of fabrication, which I find very useful. Bodily fabrication, you might be breathing with this kind of shallow tension. Mental fabrications of feelings about memories of this bad uncle. And further, I think these are more mental fabrications of judgments and evaluations of him in this situation. So then with mentality, materiality, you become uncomfortable in this whole consciousness state. Oh, that's consciousness. And then with mentality, materiality, maybe your reverie leads you to release hormones, and your body starts really taking on forms of tension and increased maybe cortisol is pumping through your system. And as you think about it more, those two things reinforce each other reciprocally, as we've described. Then you get into the six senses. You dig deeper into your sensory memory and your anticipation. Maybe you recall how alcohol smells on your uncle's breath all the time when you see him. Then you give it a definite feeling. You're caught in a bodily and mental state of reactive intensity of the situation and all that you've already built up around it. So at 7, I might switch the narrative a bit and say for contact, say you arrive at the door and your mother opens the door, you see your uncle back there over her shoulder. This visual consciousness arises with the concomitant mental door associations where you are seeing something and then you're at the mental door, similar past things arise and you start amplifying your response, your reactivity, because now you have like a whole patterning of visual responses. Now craving arises, you wish for relief from this pit in your stomach and you wish you had another family and you wish a million things and you wish you felt better. And clinging arises when you lapse into a more anxious, desperate state. Perhaps you bolt for the bathroom or you walk in with an angry stance and demeanor. And then existence, you are now that person subsumed by your projections towards your uncle, whether they're true or not. You're born, you sit down to dinner, you're completely born and frozen in this role. Maybe you take on a role. Maybe you're the invisible family member. Maybe you're the angry family member. Maybe you take on your uncle when he starts talking. But whatever role you've adopted, in a sense, you are born into this role that you have just made of all these pieces of the wheel. Now, death here, you could relate to the event ending and the ways it gets reinforced and repeated, particularly if steps 8 through 10, clinging, birth, and existence, repeat. If this happens every Sunday, you're going to really, really dig into this pattern. If this has happened since you were young, it's formative in ways that are maybe even pre-verbal. If you continue doing this with people that remind you of your uncle, it gets stronger and stronger. You can see how these patterns just can really run away like a freight train in our lives. Another fact I would add for death here at the end of this cycle is that so many potentials for experience have died, been bypassed, or lost because of this sequence. The more it repeats, the more we sense aspects of our vibrant selves that are locked away from possibility as a kind of rigid pattern becomes our repeated experience. And I know we can all relate to this in different ways. There are certain patterns, and this is something that is so remarkable to see as a therapist when people come in with story after story that is just that same spin on the wheel, and it's really sad. So we're studying these interlocked motions to help us understand our dilemmas and to aid our liberation, because we can look at the reverse and look at ways we can intervene. The Buddha mentions this frequently, that each link, depending on the one before, is also broken by change of that one or by not moving to the next. As many sutras say, now from the remainderless fading and cessation of that very ignorance comes the cessation of fabrications. So he talks about that. Now, Thanissaro Bhikkhu's writing also emphasizes this by reminding us that the wheel is not just a circle, but a system of interpenetrating parts. He actually kind of objects to the wheel image because he thinks it oversimplifies things visually, but I think it actually helps visually also. But it's important to remember that it's not simple steps 1 through 12. He writes about the factors that can be used in different placements, different scales, and for different purposes, such as how maybe perception as a factor can lead to craving, or perception could lead to right view at a certain point in the wheel. Feeling and intention and the Four Noble Truths can be seen on every link through reactivity, view, and the realizing of the arising and falling away of each step. So there's always the potential to have the experience be an awakening instead of a locking up, is what he's saying. The wheel is unstable and movable, with ignorance underlying everything and right view as a potential applicable everywhere. So if you look at it backwards, I think I have a slide. Thanks. Here's a backwards motion. Now, first I'm going to say it again in this kind of generic sense, and then we're going to go back to dinner with the uncle. But in the generic sense, if you just want to look at it backwards, to stop old age and death, and I'm going to say kind of in sort of human terms, what that would mean. Some of the steps are more easy to reverse than others. And I think some of the lower steps, the reversals would require very adept, advanced jhana state training, perhaps. But let's just look at it for ideas anyway. So to stop old age and death, stop birth. Now, maybe that could be translated as saying, stop making things so definite. Stop, assuming and clutching onto how you see things. To stop birth, stop existence. Maybe here we could say, look at the ways that we want sameness. Look at the ways we crave continuity and formations themselves. Look into that. And to stop existence, stop clinging. Try to let go of tension in mental and physical ways. Because as we're saying, they're kind of wed. They are the same thing. To let go of clinging, stop craving. Let go of vision, wanting, manipulation of the world. Try to look into that and release that a little bit. To stop craving, stop feeling. Let go of reactivity. Now, that's a very tough thing, and that's probably the juncture, certainly where classical Buddhism talks about breaking the wheel most here, and in therapy most too. Stop the reactivity. The feeling will arise, but if you can just let yourself feel it and experience it as a simple process, a kind of objective, non-personal process, then there's so much freedom born there. But to stop feeling, stop contact, I'm still going backwards. How would let go of interacting? Is that possible? And this might be something that is more a jhana kind of state here. But maybe we could say it's always good to take a break from interacting, a break from so much kind of contact in our world. Take a break from the phone. There's so much. We're overstimulated on this link for sure. And that goes on to stop contact, stop the sense spaces, let go of experience, let go of so much intensity of detail. And to stop the sense spaces, stop nama-rupa, which would be let go of the self. Let go of the sense of self. Let go of the ways that we treasure our own bodies and lifetimes. And while they are treasures and our human lives are such blessings. At times, maybe it's good to just realize that even these blessings will be let go of. So we're going deeper into the wheel and deeper into experiences to let go of, that it's not so easy. Letting go of consciousness would be the next step, letting go of our cognitive base. Here, I would say our meditation practice comes in, where we try to let go of so much discursive thinking and to stop consciousness, stop formations, stop making things, stop cultivating opinions, and to stop formations, stop ignorance, open the eyes, open the self up to greater experience. Could we take the slides down if somebody could help with that? I don't think we need them anymore. Thanks so much for helping. Okay, let's go quickly back to that family dinner and look at specific ways we could intervene in the wheel, possibly at every juncture. And I think this is the most useful thing. Reversing is quite difficult and a bit theoretical, but this is something we can all do. Okay, we're back to the family dinner. You're walking to dinner. You notice the very first indicator of reactivity in your steps. So you're taking on ignorance right away. Number 2, you notice you're starting again. You're making a case against your uncle, who you haven't even seen yet, and you notice yourself doing it. Ehe Dogen talks continuously about how delusion and enlightenment arise together. This is how it works. You see yourself doing it. Once you see it, it is no longer the same phenomena. You are not in it. So maybe you step back a bit from your state and you allow consciousness, step 3, to broaden. You very frequently, instead of trying to fix consciousness, I think it's better to just think of it broadening, going into a bigger field of process. So you step 4, Namarupa, you breathe consciously. Maybe you look around at the lights on the street. You try to kind of unify yourself in your presence. Going on to step 5, you might soothe yourself with a view you like, or purposefully, maybe you using your senses to soothe yourself. Hum a tune. Do you hear something calming? You notice your feeling again, but with dispassion and with an attitude of detached sympathy. Kind of say, of course, sometimes. This is something that my teacher is very good at. She just kind of conveys this attitude. Of course it's like that. Of course you feel that, whatever. Not whatever, but of course it's on the course, and just accept it in that way. That's for the feeling. So maybe you take a deep breath before you press the buzzer and you vow to just notice what is there without anticipation. You make contact with the present, not making contact with the expectation. So instead of allowing the craving to arrive, you breathe again into it and you notice it again. Maybe the craving to flee, you realize this is another chance. This is right for you. This is another chance to deal with trying to change. So you work to purposefully prevent clinging. You notice it each time the worries arise, and you purposefully keep switching gears and noticing. And then if you notice maybe a rising sensation like of existence, tension is getting too hard, take a break. You walk outside, you go to the bathroom, you just take a break from your uncle. And then birth, maybe you celebrate each moment of existence outside of your old paradigm. It's a new birth. Every single moment you can do that. And maybe you forget about your uncle for a minute. Maybe you laugh at him. Maybe you laugh at yourself. That would be the best. So step 12, death, you defy by staying aware and awake through another tough family dinner, and you smile to yourself as you walk home. Now, in a sense, this is all about mindfulness, right? Early intervention helps childhood problems and psychological problems. The earlier you get to the root of a problem, the more broader of an angle you will affect over time. So really, it's kind of early intervention of mindfulness. It's when you understand the wheel, getting quicker and quicker at noticing where the links are starting to ratchet up. I'll give you one other example. This is from a friend of mine. She finds herself getting in these kind of social media problems because she gets really mad at people and then lashes out in some way because they have, and it's not necessarily what they say, but it's because they haven't listened to her. And she's taken some social issue and she's done a really careful research and documentation and looked at it very particularly and written a kind of manifesto. And then somebody just comes in and goes blithely, this, and she gets furious. So she's worked for a long time to not be so reactive and not get so mad at these people when they don't pay attention to her. But one thing that we've been working with is for her to back it up and start asking questions when she's doing all that research and writing the manifesto, because she's already having the fight then. She's already preparing the case. And it's interesting to note that's quite a phenomenon when we notice ourselves preparing a case for ourselves or against something else. So when she gets back there, if she starts looking at what am I anticipating, what am I worked up about, and then she works with that, then she does not get to the point where somebody ignores her work and she gets mad. So it's kind of getting back further and further in the wheel. So as humans, our study and practices help us break these linked patterns in these kind of ways, and in so many ways. In our sitting, our walking meditations, our recollections and chanting, moment by moment, we cultivate a mind of greater clarity and compassion and mindfulness. And this is why also dynamic analytic study is useful. Or for some people, therapy, to really understand the patterning of their early lives. As Dogen again says, to study the self is to forget the self. The more you know, the quicker you can get in there and bring in right view. Buddhist practice journals are very helpful here also. And one thing I like to do sometimes, just to work with the wheel in my particular life, I'll take a dilemma, or I'll take a goal, or I'll take something I've noticed, and I'll just throw the numbers 1 through 12 on a piece of paper, and I'll just write notes about how I see it manifesting the 12 links in my particular situation. Like the Mahanidana example that we actually didn't have time to go through, but the Mahanidana does that, and I really recommend that sutra if you get a chance. They break down examples of how we go off the wheel, but it's really good to carefully annotate how the wheel is affecting us, how our intentions, you might throw the numbers 1 through 12 on a piece of paper and look at how your intention in a specific situation can be manifest in each link. So some examples I could give here are very obvious, but for instance, like if you know lack of sleep increases your reactivity, stop trying to control your reactions and get more sleep. I've never seen anybody who says to themselves, don't react, and they don't. You have to get back further and work with the underpinnings. Like addicts in any 12-step programs, those programs are so good and they train in this similar way. If certain sensory contacts lead to your feelings of craving for something, get back there and try to get away from the contacts, the people, the sensory stimuli. So while the wheel is a view of the repetitive aspects of samsara, its study brings us to path. The wheel can kind of move us on our paths. There are all kinds of motions there, but our path is kind of like that. It's not a line. It's like that idea of a widening circle. We can take in more and perceive more and work with more in our present moments. And when we understand causation, it allows us to participate in path. We're not following it or manipulating it or seeking things, but we are reciprocally interacting with our own development. And we stop asking why so much. We start asking what's moving with what and how can it work better for myself and for all beings. The universe is self-regulating and impersonal, and these laws are only inferable to us, but they're so vivid in our experience as the multitudes of events take shape in our lives. And even if our intention is just one force among many, many forces, it gives it precision and power to understand what we're talking about here. This makes me think of some wonderful lines from Tsongkhapa, Splendor of an Autumn Moon. For you, emptiness seen as dependent arising does not render as contradictory emptiness of self-nature and ability to function. So I think that gets back to Dogen's scale and emptiness. He's saying, you know, we need to function in our lives every moment, but we need to also be in contact with the emptiness of our self-nature, with the way all these forces are moving together to create our experience. We see these scales, these links on the scale of our day-to-day experience. We see it in our historical particular lives. And when we see them, we can operate more compassionately and smoothly in our lives. And this relative truth work lets us feel the unbounded capacities of our intentions and realizations for all beings. So I'm going to stop there and leave a little time for any questions that may have arisen, or any comments or examples that people have in their own lives of this material.
Thank you, Dr. Jacobs, for sharing. For me, that was a very hard topic to understand. Would you agree?
Yes, it's very complex. Like everything in the Abhidharma, it's hard to know where to start because everything is so interactive. So anywhere you start, you need to explain everything else. And it's like that. But I hope that by kind of giving examples and walking through it in human experience, we take the complexity of the Dhamma and we experience it in our bodies and in our lives. And I think that's our working ground. So that's what we try to do. But it is complicated, especially I know I throw in a lot of stuff from a lot of sources.
But that's good though.
Well, I think I like the way it all comes together myself, but also I think that helps because different people pick up on different things. We all have different kinds of minds, and some minds are very technical and analytic, and some minds are more bodily oriented or more feeling or more, kind of interpersonally oriented. So I try to throw in different things and different poetries of expression that different people can.
Yeah, it's very helpful the fact that you gave examples, that we can relate or we can apply all of the 12 aspects, in the day-to-day basis.
I hope so, because we're living this.
Yeah.
We all are. I mean, it's not out there. We are actually living this moment to moment. So, yeah, it is a lot to try to lay out that kind of thing.
So I do have a question. Can we conclude that dependent originations is the explanation on why dukkha or suffering emerge?
I would say a little more how it emerges than why.
Okay.
But yes, it is absolutely, the mechanisms of samsara. Yes. Yeah, the why it emerges, I suppose, in a way you could say it's all based on ignorance.
Gotcha.
Yeah, ignorance of and lack of acceptance of the arising and falling away of all phenomena on all scales.
There's a question. Let me see if I can. It is it's just an appreciation. It's a very modern way to look at dependent origination and its psychological aspects, especially as a psychology expert. Thank you, Dr. Jacobs.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, it really, I've lived in the psychological world for a long time. I mean, certainly I've always lived in the psychological world, but I think it's another reciprocal becoming. If you can look at this old original Buddhist teaching and this kind of with this modern terminology, we can use it more, but also as modern people, this very original Buddhist teaching gives us a foothold in change in a way that I think nothing in psychology does, truthfully. This really gives us a kind of perceptual and analytic breakthrough that is I think very, very helpful. So thanks. It's really, when you listen for a very long time to people talking about what matters to them and talking about dukkha and the kind of suffering they go through, you really want to find the strongest tools you can to help.
Bante also put out his 2 cents. Um, he thinks that it's very important to know how to apply these lofty Buddhist theories in our real day-to-day practice.
Absolutely agree with you, Dr. Bante. Yes. Yeah. And that's what you said, like in your New Year's talk, you're like, it's a beautiful study, but the study should not be out there. The study should be in our practice, and we should see things changing. We should see the way that we interact with the world changing and becoming more compassionate and becoming, I would say, easier too. We should see this happening. Yeah. It has to be real.
Mm-hmm.
The Buddha taught real people.
Yeah. And then Bante also shared learning the theory and applying it are two different things. It's definitely true.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. So in these, that's why I think it's really important to do things like a practice journal, and why I do these exercises of putting my own experience on the wheel, because that kind of crunches through it in my real life. And then I walk out that door and it's like ready. It's ready. The next interaction that comes up, I've already kind of planted the seeds of this awareness.
Sure. Dr. Jacobs, do you have any links that you can share with the audience that has, more explanation on the topic?
Oh, well, there's so much. The book that I mentioned by Thanissaro Bhikkhu is wonderful, The Shape of Suffering. I think it always helps to also go back to the Comprehensive Manual of Abhidhamma, Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation and commentary is so rich. So if you look at this section there, it's wonderful. The two sutras that I feel I would also really recommend, the Mahanidana Sutra, which I talked about a little, but it also has a section talking about how this applies on a big social scale, like how getting caught in the wheel leads to war. And I can't think of anything more important in this world that we live in, where the world is going awry, but it is on the same issues that we're talking about in individual lives. It's just this huge compounding of it. So I really recommend looking up the Mahanidana Sutra and also the Upanisa Sutra. That's the transcendent dependent origination. And that goes into the links of freedom and liberation, and how spinning off of suffering, you start with faith, and then you go through these kind of like happiness and serenity, and then natural renunciations of grasping. So that's another very inspiring sutra. And again, Bhikkhu Bodhi's commentary there is, I think, some of his most inspired writing. It's quite beautiful that I've read.
Yeah.
So I would recommend
It
those.
goes into the detail, huh?
Yes, the step-by-step of moving out of this wheel of
Yeah.
samsara. And but beyond that, it is a core teaching. So I think there's no end of good reading.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's a question, Dr. Jacobs. Do you have some simple tips for common people to grasp this powerful teaching?
Wow, that's a good question. If I was to try to boil this down more, I would say, you know how the logarithms work in your computer? Like you search something and then they give you more and they pull you further and they pull you further and they make things more extreme. Basically, that is the wheel. And that is also how our cognition kind of works if it is untended to. So I would say watch what is internally logarithmic in your mind. Watch ways that you build on things and try to notice that. And whenever you notice yourself reinforcing an opinion or making a case or giving extra reasons for something or kind of physically clutching up, whenever you notice those signs of proliferation of attitude, take a breath and stop and just say, that's great. I noticed myself doing that. Just do that. That's also a teaching from my teacher and from Ehe Dogen. Practice is delusion and enlightenment coming up together. So it is an enlightening moment when you notice it. So I would say just try to notice that feel internally. And that is probably a step somewhere on the wheel. And then try to loosen it. Try to bring in right view. Try to say, this is me trying to see more broadly what my human life is doing. That would be my most simplified way to describe it. It's a very good question.
And like a lot of mindfulness, huh?
Yes, a lot of mindfulness. And also, I want to say by common people, please know that you're referring to everyone. We are all struggling with this and the complexity and the karmic pulls of it. This is our human realm.
Bante has shared several. One of them is Kachanagota Sutta. But I think this is an article that Bante shared. There's another one, Mahanidana Sutta.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar, Dr. Jacobs, with that?
Well, that's the one I was talking about.
Yeah, okay.
Mahanidana. It's where they talk about, they actually take a kind of detour off of craving, and they talk about how craving leads to essentially kind of possessiveness, and how possessiveness leads to defensiveness, and defensiveness leads to conflict, leads to war.
Okay.
So it's not sutra, but also where I was quoting where he talks about, the Buddha talks about how nama rupa and consciousness mutually create each other. That's in there too. Beautiful.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's got a lot in there. It's very packed.
There's another one. It's Upanisa Sutta.
Now that's the transcendent dependent arising, which talks about the fact that that same mechanism where with this as a condition, this will happen. It's the same mechanism. It's like the same essential process, but it's moving in a transcendent direction, moving in the direction of liberation. It's also very beautiful.
I'm going to have to check that out this weekend.
Yeah, they're great. They're all online and easily available.
Let me see. I don't think there is any other questions. Time. Yeah. We can conclude for tonight's lecture, Dr. Jacobs. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation again. We're always honored to have you.
Well, I am so happy to be here, and thank you so much for your help, technical and otherwise. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Dear Dhamma friends, thanks to you all for being part of this wonderful event. We hope today's lecture has enriched your knowledge and inspired you. Let us continue to learn, grow, and support each other in our quest for greater understanding of the Dhamma. We have an exciting lineup of speakers and topics ahead. all aimed at deepening our understanding of Buddhism and its application in life. Stay connected by subscribing to our YouTube channel and following us on Facebook and other social media platforms to stay updated on upcoming lectures. With that, we conclude lecture number 54 of Dhamma USA's Thursday guest lecture series. Until we meet again next Thursday, may the Dhamma guide us all towards a peaceful and happy life. Thank you and have a great evening.
Thank you so much.